Seattle woke up under a gray sky that morning, the kind of sky that made the whole city feel quiet and slow. Emily Parker stood in her bedroom, half awake, thinking she had the entire house to herself. The heater hummed softly, the windows fogged gently, and for a moment she enjoyed the calm that came with believing no one else was home. She was in just her underwear because she had planned to change quickly before starting laundry. It was normal for her, something she did every time Mark left. Early for work, her husband had rushed out around 6, barely saying goodbye, which had become common in their marriage lately. It hurt, but she pretended she didn't feel the sting anymore. Her stepson Jason, 19, was supposed to be at college hours ago. He usually left early to avoid traffic, so she didn't even consider he might return unexpectedly. She didn't think about him being in the house at all, which made what happened next hit even harder. Emily bent over the laundry basket, searching for a warm sweater to throw on. Her mind drifted to small worries, the bills on the counter, her fading connection with Mark, the dull ache that came from feeling invisible in her own home. She didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear the door downstairs. Nothing warned her of the moment about to unfold. She turned around at the exact moment the bedroom door opened. Jason stood there in the doorway, frozen, his backpack half slipping off his shoulder. His eyes widened as he realized what he had walked into. Emily gasped, grabbing the first blanket she could reach, pulling it over herself in shaky embarrassment. Jason instantly stepped back, apologizing in a rush. "I'm sorry, I thought you weren't home. I thought I left my laptop here." His voice cracked slightly, the kind of nervous tone someone gets when they walk into a moment they never intended to see. Then the door closed again, leaving the room thick with silence. Emily stood there breathing unevenly, her face burning. It wasn't because anything inappropriate happened, it wasn't because either of them did anything wrong. It was simply the shock of vulnerability, the kind of shock that makes a person rethink everything around them. She wrapped the blanket tighter and sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm her heart. She wasn't angry at Jason, she wasn't afraid, she just felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. And underneath that feeling was something heavier, something she didn't talk about even with herself. It was the growing emptiness in her marriage. Mark had not touched her hand in months. He barely looked at her the same way he used to. His affection had faded like old paint peeling away from a neglected wall. Their conversations had grown short, cold, predictable. They lived together but felt miles apart. Jason's unexpected entrance didn't create that problem. It only reminded her of how much she stood alone, how unseen she felt, how fragile the quiet inside the house had become. When Emily finally left the bedroom, the hallway felt strangely narrow. She peeked downstairs and saw Jason sitting quietly at the dining table, staring at the laptop he came home to find. His posture said everything. He felt embarrassed, guilty, and unsure of how to look her in the eyes. She didn't want him to drown in awkwardness, so she walked down slowly, wrapped in a long cardigan now. She cleared her throat gently. "Jason, don't worry about earlier, it was just bad timing." He looked relieved she wasn't upset. He apologized again, but she smiled softly, letting him know it was okay. If anything, she appreciated his maturity. He could have laughed or made the situation more uncomfortable, but he didn't. He respected her, and that made the moment easier to breathe through. Still, the home felt different now. Something unspoken lingered in the air, something that had nothing to do with the moment and everything to do with the emotional cracks already splitting the family apart. Emily tried to continue her day like normal. She cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, made coffee, but her thoughts drifted restlessly. She kept thinking of the shock on Jason's face, the way he immediately stepped back, the look of worry in his eyes. It wasn't the worry of someone who had seen something scandalous. It was the worry of someone who didn't want to hurt her comfort or dignity. But more than that, she kept thinking of Mark. His absence felt louder today, louder than the heater, louder than the ticking clock, louder than her own heartbeat. When Mark came home that evening, he acted like nothing had changed. He walked in, tossed his keys onto the counter, murmured a quiet "hey," and headed straight to the fridge. Emily watched him, searching for signs of the man she married 8 years ago, the man who used to hold her hand without needing a reason. But that man felt like a memory now. She asked about his day. He answered with quick, clipped sentences, as if he was checking off boxes on a form. Jason came down a few minutes later, saying he needed to return to campus, but before he left he gave Emily a small, understanding look, a silent message that he still felt bad about the morning. She offered a reassuring nod, letting him go. After dinner, Emily sat on the couch alone. Mark worked on his laptop across the room. Their silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that grows between two people who have lost the rhythm of each other. Every so often, Mark glanced at his phone with a faint smile, a smile he no longer gave. Emily noticed, even though she tried not to. Something inside her sank deeper each time. She didn't accuse him of anything, she didn't ask questions, because she wasn't ready to hear answers that might break her heart completely. Instead, she held her coffee cup tighter, the warmth grounding her in a world where she felt herself slipping. That night, when she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment with Jason again and again, not because of the embarrassment, but because it made her realize how vulnerable she felt in every part of her life. It made her see how much she longed for connection, for affection, for someone to truly notice her again. She thought of her younger self, the hopeful woman who walked into her marriage full of dreams. She wondered when she stopped feeling like that woman. She wondered when she stopped feeling wanted. As she breathed in the dark, her chest tightening with unspoken emotions, she realized something painful but true. The incident with Jason was not the real problem. The real problem was the loneliness she carried inside her every day. The bedroom felt cold even with the blankets pulled up. Mark slept facing away from her as usual, an entire gulf between their bodies. Emily closed her eyes, feeling tears form but refusing to let them fall. Something inside her whispered that change was coming. A change she didn't ask for but could no longer avoid. She didn't know yet that the awkward moment in the morning was only the beginning. She didn't know it would pull open doors she had kept locked for too long. She didn't know that the truth hidden in her home would soon rise to the surface. But as she lay awake, listening to the quiet night pressing against the windows, she felt it. A shift, a warning, a beginning she never expected. The house held too many secrets now, and soon, one of them would break open with a force she wasn't ready for. The morning after the awkward moment, the house felt heavier than usual. Emily walked downstairs feeling the weight of everything in her chest. Even though nothing dramatic had happened, it was just an accident, but it shook the balance inside her home, and she could feel the tension settle into the walls like dust. Jason sat at the table, quietly eating cereal. His shoulders were tense, and he kept staring at the bowl as if it might suddenly talk to him. Emily noticed how uncomfortable he felt, and she wished she could make it easier. She didn't blame him at all, but he clearly thought she did. She poured herself some coffee and tried to smile. "You don't have to feel weird," she said gently. Her voice was soft, hoping to bring peace into the room. Jason looked up quickly, relief flickering in his eyes before he lowered them again. "I didn't mean to scare you or anything," he said. His tone was sincere, nervous and respectful. "It's fine," she replied, and she meant it. It wasn't the moment that haunted her, it was everything else, the loneliness, the silence, the cold marriage she lived inside every day. Mark walked into the kitchen a few minutes later. He didn't feel the tension, or maybe he simply pretended not to. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, gave a half-hearted greeting, and stepped out again to answer a phone call. Emily watched him leave, wondering how a husband could drift so far from his own home without anyone noticing when it started. Jason grabbed his backpack and stood. "I'll head to campus now," he said quietly. Emily nodded, and he left with a small, apologetic smile that showed he still felt responsible for the discomfort. When the door shut behind him, the silence grew again, a silence that didn't feel peaceful but empty. Emily cleaned the kitchen slowly, wiping counters and washing dishes she didn't even remember using. Her mind ran through memories of her marriage, the early years when Mark made her laugh, the late nights they used to talk about dreams and plans. The shift didn't happen overnight, but somehow those moments faded until all that was left were brief conversations and long stretches of distance. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about bills, and she sighed, feeling tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She walked to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the framed pictures on the wall, photos of a family that once felt connected. Now they looked like scenes from someone else's life. In the afternoon, Mark came home earlier than expected. Emily hoped he might want to talk, maybe even ask how she was, but he walked past her with barely a glance and went straight to his office. She heard him laugh softly on the phone, a laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in a long time. It stung, a sharp reminder of how far apart they had drifted. Later that day, Jason returned unexpectedly again, this time because one of his classes got cancelled. He hesitated at the doorway when he saw her in the living room. Emily could tell he didn't want to make the house tense again, but she gave him a small smile to ease his worry. "You're okay," she said, gesturing for him to sit if he wanted. He stayed standing for a moment, looking unsure, then finally sat on the opposite end of the couch. The silence stretched a little until he finally spoke. "I didn't mean to make the morning weird." "It wasn't weird," she said quietly. It was just unexpected, that's all. Jason nodded, his expression showing relief mixed with something deeper. He looked at her with concern. Not about the morning but about something else, something he had clearly noticed long before today. You don't seem happy lately, he said in a low voice. Emily wasn't prepared for the honesty. It caught her off guard. She blinked, trying to steady herself. I'm fine, she answered quickly, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to her own ears. Jason didn't push her. He simply looked at her with genuine empathy, a kind she didn't receive at home anymore. It wasn't inappropriate, it wasn't over the line. It was just a young man seeing pain in someone he respected. I just want you to know, he said carefully. You're not alone. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. The kindness in his tone cracked something inside her. She didn't break down, but she felt the wave of emotion rise in her chest. She had spent months pretending her marriage was fine, pretending she didn't notice the distance or the growing silence. Hearing someone acknowledge it aloud made it real. Emily whispered a small thank you, unable to say more without her voice shaking. Jason nodded and left the room, giving her space. She appreciated his thoughtfulness more than she could say. When Mark came out of his office later, he didn't notice her mood. He didn't notice her red eyes or the tension in her shoulders. He only grabbed his jacket and said he had to go out for a late meeting. Emily asked, another one? Her tone light but questioning. He replied with a shrug, work's busy, and walked out again, leaving her in the quiet house with more doubts than answers. Days passed in the same slow, emotional rhythm. Mark's late nights increased, his attention faded even more, and Emily felt herself drifting farther from him with each passing hour. She tried to talk to him one evening, but he brushed off her concerns, saying everything was fine and she was overthinking. But she wasn't. She felt reality shifting beneath her feet. Jason stayed careful and respectful, always making sure to give her space, but occasionally offering a kind word or a small gesture that reminded her she wasn't completely invisible, like helping carry groceries inside without being asked, or checking if she needed help with dinner, or simply saying, you look tired, you should rest. These gestures weren't romantic, they weren't inappropriate, they were simply human connections, the kind she no longer had with her own husband. Emily found herself reflecting on the changes in the house, the missing warmth, the missing conversations, the missing affection. She thought of how long she had tried to fix things, how many times she reached out only to feel rejected. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner where Mark barely said a word, Emily stayed in the kitchen washing dishes alone. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind raced. She wondered if she had done something wrong, wondered if she could have saved the marriage earlier, wondered if Mark even saw her anymore. When she finished cleaning, she walked into the living room and saw Mark's phone on the table lighting up with a message. She didn't plan to look. She didn't invade privacy by force. The notification appeared clearly on the screen without her touching anything. A message from a woman's name she didn't recognize. The preview read, "Did you make it home? I miss you already." Emily's breath caught, her vision blurring for a moment. The room seemed to tilt, her knees felt weak, and she grabbed the back of the couch to steady herself. She didn't open the phone, she didn't scroll, she didn't search through anything, she didn't need to. That one message spoke louder than 100 conversations. The sinking feeling she had been ignoring for months suddenly formed into undeniable truth. Mark wasn't distant because of stress or work overload. He had drifted because he was getting emotional attention somewhere else. Emily sat down, her heart pounding, her hands cold. Everything made sense now. The late meetings, the distracted smiles, the new energy in his voice when he talked on the phone. Jason walked into the room a few minutes later, stopping immediately when he saw her pale face. "Emily," he said gently, "are you okay?" She shook her head slowly, tears gathering but refusing to fall. He didn't ask what happened, he didn't pry, he didn't overstep. He simply sat near her, offering quiet support, the kind she desperately needed in that moment. Emily felt the weight of the truth settling into her bones. Her marriage was breaking. Her home was no longer safe or warm, and the days ahead would bring answers she wasn't ready to face. But the moment had arrived. The truth behind the silence was finally rising to the surface, and nothing in the house would be the same again. The moment Emily saw the message on Mark's phone, the world around her seemed to slow, her chest tightened, her breath shook, and a deep cold spread through her arms like winter creeping under the skin. She didn't open anything. She didn't scroll, she didn't need to. The small preview on the lock screen was enough to break the last thread she had been holding onto. Jason stood nearby, quiet but steady, watching her carefully without demanding answers. His presence felt grounding, But her heart still raced with fear and disbelief. She felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under her life, and she was falling with nothing to hold on to. When Mark came home later that evening, Emily stood in the living room waiting. She didn't want a loud fight. She didn't want screaming or blaming, she just wanted the truth. The air was heavy between them as soon as he walked through the door. He paused when he saw her expression, his eyes shifting from hers to the phone she held loosely in her hand. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Her voice didn't crack, but it trembled just enough to show how much strength it took to speak. Mark looked tired, not from work, but from the weight of keeping secrets. He sat down slowly, rubbing his face as if dragging out time might change what was coming, but nothing could change it now. "I saw a message," she said, her words soft but sharp enough to pierce the silence. "I didn't open anything, but I saw enough." Mark closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. The truth was right there on his face, in the way he didn't jump to defend himself, in the way he didn't get angry or accuse her of snooping. He simply looked defeated, like someone who finally reached the moment he had been avoiding. Emily waited, her hands cold, her heartbeat uneven. She wanted him to deny it, to tell her the message meant nothing, but also felt afraid of hearing a lie she wouldn't believe. After a long pause, Mark spoke. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," he said quietly. "It started during work. I didn't plan it." The words hit her harder than a shout would have. She felt her throat tighten as the truth settled inside her, not fast and violent, but slow and suffocating. The betrayal wasn't just about another person. It was about the distance he allowed to grow, the affection he stopped giving, the silence he hid behind. "Why didn't you talk to me?" she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" Mark shook his head. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, the irony striking them both at the same time, because nothing hurt more than this moment. Emily stood in the center of the room, unable to move. Every memory of their marriage, every moment she tried to fix things alone, every night she lay awake wondering what she had done wrong, came rushing back like a storm. She didn't scream, she didn't insult him, she didn't collapse. Instead, she let the truth sit between them like a cold shadow, a shadow that had been growing for months, maybe even years. When the conversation ended, Emily walked upstairs quietly. Mark stayed downstairs with his head in his hands. The house felt divided, one half filled with guilt, the other half filled with heartbreak. Jason was in his room but heard the faint echoes of the conversation. When he saw Emily pass the hallway, he stepped out carefully and asked, "Do you want some water or tea?" His voice was soft, steady, respectful. Emily shook her head, but she appreciated the offer more than he knew. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but the weight of the moment pushed tears to her eyes anyway. She wiped them quickly, not wanting to make him feel responsible for her pain. In the days that followed, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Mark and Emily spoke only when necessary, like two strangers living under the same roof. Jason moved carefully, trying not to make things harder, but also not wanting Emily to feel alone. She spent long evenings sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying every sign she ignored. Every moment she told herself it was just stress. Every time she tried to talk and he pushed her away, the truth left a deep ache inside her, a mix of sorrow and relief, because at least now she knew the reason behind the coldness. One afternoon, Emily went for a walk through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The sky was gray again, matching the mood that settled over her. She walked without a destination, trying to clear the storm in her head. Every step felt heavy, but also necessary. She remembered the early days of their marriage, when they were full of laughter, late-night conversations, weekend trips to the coast, and promises they believed would last forever. Those memories felt far away now, like photos left out in the rain, faded and hard to recognize. When she returned home, she found Jason sitting on the porch. He looked up immediately, concern written across his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, not out of curiosity but out of genuine care. She nodded weakly. Though she wasn't okay at all, she sat beside him, feeling the cool wood of the porch beneath her. "It hurts," she admitted. "More than I thought it would." Jason didn't say anything at first. He just sat with her, letting the moment breathe. "You didn't deserve this," he finally said. "You were always kind to him, always trying." Emily swallowed hard, feeling tears rise again. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed to break in front of him. But Jason wasn't judging her. He looked at her like someone who wished he could fix the problem even though he couldn't. That night, Emily slept in the guest room, not because Mark asked her to, but because her heart couldn't bear the cold distance anymore. She needed air, space, clarity. Mark stood at the doorway briefly, wanting to say something but unable to form the words. Emily closed her eyes, pretending to sleep so she wouldn't have to hear an apology that came too late. The following week was filled with quiet decisions. Emily met with a counselor for guidance, not about the marriage yet, but for herself. She needed to rebuild her strength. She needed to understand who she was outside the pain. Jason noticed her efforts, and he supported her in small but meaningful ways, carrying groceries, checking if she ate, offering a joke on days she looked exhausted. He didn't replace anything in her life. He simply helped her feel less invisible, less forgotten. One evening, after a long counseling session, Emily sat on her balcony, watching the Seattle skyline fade into twilight. The air was cool, and the city lights flickered like distant stars. She wrapped a blanket around herself, taking slow, steady breaths. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of warmth inside her chest, not from someone else but from herself. It was the feeling of healing beginning, step by step, quietly and carefully. She didn't know what the future held, whether her marriage would recover or whether she needed to walk a new path. But she knew one thing clearly now. The moment in the bedroom that started everything was never about embarrassment. It was the doorway into truth she had ignored for too long. It was the moment that forced open the silence and revealed the cracks in her life. And in some strange way, it helped her find the strength she had lost along the way. Months later, Emily stood on the same balcony again, watching another sunset paint the city gold. She felt stronger, calmer, more certain of her worth. She was beginning a new chapter, one built on honesty, healing, and self-respect. Her life had changed, not through chaos but through truth, and in that truth, she finally found the courage to move forward. In her heart, for the first time in a long while, she felt hope.